Hello, and thank you for joining us. Last time we talked about the causes of World War II. Today, we will focus on how America gets dragged in to the Second World War. As you know, the war started in 1939 when Adolf Hitler invades Poland using the Blitzkrieg or lightning war method. But prior to the actual start of the war, the U.S. had been proclaiming its neutrality and its commitment to the idea of isolationism that it had returned to after the First World War. It had done so through a series of acts known as the Neutrality Acts, the first of which comes in 1935. And this act prevented the U.S. from supplying arms, ammunition, or implements of war to nations in conflict. Congress would then pass additional neutrality acts in 1936 and in 1937. And these were all designed to keep the country out of the conflicts that were brewing in Europe. The actual start of the war put the United States in a risky position. Americans were fearful of getting drawn into the fighting, but they wanted to help the Allies. France and Britain needed weapons, but the Neutrality Acts banned the sale of arms to countries at war. So in November of 1939, Roosevelt pushed a bill through Congress that repealed the arms embargo. This Neutrality Act of 1939 included a cash and carry provision. Nations had to pay cash for materials and carry them away in their own ships. This allowed the United States to support their allies in the allied countries of Britain and France with this cash and carry model. As the United States created ways to help out the allied nations of England and France, they also started to take precautionary measures should they have to enter the war. And this could be seen in the Acts of Congress in September of 1940 when they enacted the first peacetime military draft in U.S. history. And a month later, the Selective Service would enroll 16 million men into service. Yet, during the 1940 election campaign, Roosevelt assured Americans, "Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign wars." In November, he would win his third term as president. With the war waging on, in December of 1940, France had already fallen to Germany, and Britain was embattled in the Battle of Britain, which were these series of airstrikes that Germany was doing on England, London specifically. In December, Churchill declared his country was nearly bankrupt. So Roosevelt was determined to provide Britain all aid short of war. So he urged Congress to adopt a plan to lend, not sell, arms to Britain. This legislation became known as the Lend-Lease Act and was passed in March of 1941. But it caused a heated debate in Congress and in the American public. A few months after the Lend-Lease Act had been approved in March of 1941, Hitler broke his non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union in June. This would bring in the USSR to the war on the side of Great Britain and France. And soon the United States would start lending the Soviet Union weapons under the Lend-Lease Act. But Great Britain was still in need of more allies and more support. So in August, Roosevelt met with Churchill in secret aboard a warship in Canadian waters in the North Atlantic. And they created what was known as the Atlantic Charter, in which they promised not to use the war to expand their own territory. And they asserted the right of all peoples to self-government. 3 months later, Congress voted to allow American merchant ships to arm themselves and to sail to Britain. If you recall, Germany had two allies during the war, Italy and Japan. Japan had been seeking this policy of expansion just as Italy and Germany had. Japan was moving in areas such as French Indochina, Southeast Asia, and had set its sights on the Dutch East Indies, all in a hope to establish a new order in East Asia with Japan as the center. But the United States kept getting in their way. The United States was sending loans and other aid to Japan's enemy in China. They were freezing Japanese assets in the United States. And they also placed an embargo or cut off trade of oil and steel to Japan. So Japan had had enough, and decided to attack the United States on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. They hoped to carry out a knockout blow to the United States by devastating the naval fleet. Remember, Pearl Harbor geographically is pretty close to Japan as it's located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So on the early Sunday morning of December 7th, 1941, the naval base on Oahu at Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese as more than 300 bombers and fighter planes launched the attack. In a little more than 2 hours, the Japanese sank or damaged 18 American ships. At nearby airfields, Japanese warplanes damaged or destroyed about 300 military aircraft. In all, the raid left more than 2,400 Americans dead and nearly 1,200 wounded. The Japanese lost just 29 planes in the attack. The next day, President Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war against Japan. He called December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. And Congress did. In a Senate vote of 82-0 and a House vote of 388-1, the United States declared war on Japan. Roosevelt acknowledged that hostilities exist. Our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. Americans began to prepare for a conflict that would test the nation's strength and courage as they fought a war on multiple fronts. Next time, we'll talk about how this war and mobilizing for it will impact the home front.